What if the greatest power humanity ever achieves is the power to decide what humanity will be? And what if the people making that decision no longer believe in right and wrong? In the previous videos, we explored C.S. Lewis's argument step by step. First, that modern education was teaching something dangerous, that moral judgments are nothing more than personal feelings, what C.S. Lewis called the loss of objective value. Then we explored what he called the Tao, the shared moral framework that appears across civilizations. And we arrived at a conclusion: you are never outside the Tao. Even those who try to reject it must still rely on it. But in the final chapter of The Abolition of Man, Lewis asks a deeper question. What happens if a society stops believing in it anyway? Lewis argues that something new is emerging, not just new knowledge, but new power. For the most of history, human beings tried to understand nature. Now, they are beginning to reshape it through science, through psychology, through technology, and eventually through the manipulation of human beings themselves. Lewis gives a name to those who would wield this power: the conditioners, not rulers in the traditional sense, not kings, not tyrants, but something more subtle, a group of people who gain the ability to shape beliefs, desires, values, not through force alone, but through education, culture, and influence. Not always deliberately, not always maliciously, but gradually, through systems that shape what people see, what they believe, and what they come to want. At first, this might sound like progress, humanity gaining control over itself, but Lewis points out a crucial distinction. It is not humanity as a whole making these decisions. It is some people deciding for others, and more importantly, for the future. But this is where the earlier argument returns. If the Tao is rejected, what guides the conditioners? What standards do they use? Reason cannot supply it, science cannot supply it, and if objective value has been dismissed, nothing remains above their choice. So what is left? Not truth, not justice, not virtue, only preference, impulse, power. The conditioners do not stand above human nature. They are governed by it. And here is the paradox at the center of Lewis's argument. The more power humanity gains over nature, the more it risks losing control over itself. Because the final conquest of nature is the conquest of human nature, and once that line is crossed, there is no higher authority left to appeal to. This leads to Lewis's most controversial claim, that what we call the conquest of nature is, in its final form, the conquest of humanity. By a few individuals. Imagine a generation designed rather than raised, not taught what is true but shaped to prefer what is useful, and at that point something irreversible happens. We no longer shape ourselves according to values, we are shaped according to decisions, and those decisions are no longer grounded in anything higher. What disappears is not intelligence, not capacity, not power. What disappears is the human being as a moral creature, a belief capable of recognizing good and evil, right and wrong, better and worse. Without that, we are not elevated, we are reduced. And so Lewis leaves us with a warning. The danger is not that humanity becomes evil, the danger is that it becomes something less than human. Efficient, capable, managed, but no longer guided by anything that gives those abilities meaning. And this is no longer a distant possibility. We live in a world of behavioral influence, algorithmic shaping, institutional conditioning, systems that do not simply inform, but guide, nudge, shape. The question is no longer whether human behavior can be influenced. It is, who decides how it is shaped, and according to what standard? Which brings us back to where this began, the Tao, the moral structure that makes judgment possible. You are never outside it, but you can forget it, and if it is forgotten, something else will take its place. Because if nothing remains above power, then nothing remains to limit it, and if nothing limits it, then what we call progress may not be progress at all. In the end, the question is not whether humanity will gain power, it is whether it will retain the wisdom to use it, because without that, the final victory over nature may not feel like defeat, but it may feel like progress, efficient, stable, controlled, and only in hindsight would we recognize what was lost, not power, not knowledge, but the ability to know what those things were for. And if we lose the ability to recognize value, we will not control the future. We will be shaped by it. I'll see you in the next episode.